Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about Aristotelian virtue ethics. And this theory in particular talks about character traits and virtue. So those are kind of the big ideas that the readings for, this module have talked about. I'm going to set the basics of what Aristotelian virtue ethics is, and then I'm going to use the articles that I assigned secondarily to talk about various complications. But before I get to Aristotelian virtue ethics, I want to start with this really famous thought experiment by Robert Nozick called the experience machine. And so this is in his book Anarchy, State, and Utopia. It's a really interesting book for any people who are interested in contemporary libertarian political theory. It's a book you should check out. So Robert Nozick, Anarchy, State, and Utopia. But along the way to talking about his various political goals, he also talks about some ethical stuff too. And so one of the first things that he says with this thing is, imagine that there's this perfect virtual reality system. Okay, this was written long before even really personal computing, but definitely long before VRs. And so he said, imagine there's these super duper neuroscientists, and they're able to basically plug you into a machine. And once you're plugged into this machine, it's completely indistinguishable from reality, right? It's absolutely perfect. And you can set the parameters. You can say exactly what you want to be programmed into it, right? And so he asks, just like the reader, and I would ask you in class if this were a face-to-face lecture, what kind of things would you program into it, right? Just think about what you would program into the machine. Even if you decided that you didn't want to plug into it, what are the kinds of things that you would program into it if you were, say, the research and development team trying to get this machine off the ground, right? Just think about that, right? And then he asks, would you plug in, right? And so he's imagining that you plug in for the rest of your life, and he's also imagining that you don't have to worry about how the machines will maintain themselves. And if you don't like it, you can say every couple years you can come out and sort of change the programs. But given that there's this virtual reality experience that's completely indistinguishable from reality, right? Would you plug in? And he's going to say no, right? No. Why? Well, he says, we want to feel attached to reality. We don't just care about optimal psychological outcome, right? And there's a lot of other stuff that is in the background of this that we don't necessarily have to get into, but I want to get into the next couple of experiments. So he says, okay, right, if we think that the main reason that most people won't plug in is because it's unattached to reality, let's think of a machine where we are attached to reality. But it's this machine that allows for perfect human enhancement. He calls this the transformation machine. And so I would ask, what would you program into it? So if you use this machine, it turns you into whatever you want. Think like Captain America, right? So I could program whatever trait I personally want to become if I use this machine, right? And he basically asks, well, would you use the transformation machine? Would you use this machine that perfectly, it's not an imperfect medical technology, it works out, right? There are no side effects. Would you use it to change anything about yourself? Like for me, would I change my weight? Would I change my memory? Something like that, right? And he's going to say no, okay? And I'll get to why, because it's kind of related to the last machine, which is called the results machine. And this is a machine where he says, imagine that you have this machine that will transform the world into a way that you would like, okay? So maybe you end global climate change, right? Maybe you end racial injustice, or maybe you end radical economic inequality. Those types of things are the things that you would plug into this machine. And he asks, I said, what would you program to it? But he asked, would you use this machine? Okay. And at the end, he basically says, no, we probably wouldn't use any of these machines. Why? Well, it matters to us that we're attached to reality, and that we're actually doing the living, and that a machine or some other process isn't mitigating that experience, or they aren't doing the living for us. Okay? And so you don't have to buy necessarily into that conclusion, but I like this thought experiment because it really forces you through multiple steps to try and think about, what kind of life do I want to lead, right? So, namely, how would I program the experience machine if I could, the virtual reality, right? Or how would I use the transformation machine to change myself? Okay? And what kind of world would we like to form? So how would I spend my days, my works, to basically affect the world, right? And so I think it's a very useful thought experiment for thinking about those things. Now, Nozick thought that this showed that we care about more than pleasure. I think that that conclusion is probably right, although this is a very short excerpt. He needs a ton more argumentation to get to that conclusion. But this segues nicely into Aristotelian virtue ethics, okay? And that's because in Aristotelian virtue ethics, there are two really big questions that we need to entertain. The first one is, what is a good life, right? What is a good life? And we read Julia Annis's introductory article about this, and she's a wonderful philosopher, very competent in contemporary ethics, and an absolute expert and powerhouse in ancient philosophy. Okay. And one of the things that's really crucial here is the idea that Aristotle says, look, we all want to be happy. Okay. We all want to be happy. Even the contrarian types who say, I don't want to be happy or whatever, he's going to say, look, they're just being difficult, or maybe there's maybe they need therapy or something like that, but we all want to be happy. Now, whenever he says this, he admits what we disagree on is what we think happiness lies in, right? And we'll talk a little bit about this. And then the second big question, in addition to what is a good life, is what character do I need in order to achieve that good life? Okay, so if I've set my goals for reality, as far as trying to live a good life, I need also to set goals or to figure out patterns of ways that I should develop myself in order to live a good life, right? And here's the thing. No matter what, we develop habits, okay? In the things that we continually face in life, whether we like it or not, we are going to develop certain patterns of being. We're going to think certain ways, we're going to feel certain ways, we're going to interact with the world in certain ways. And Aristotle asks, how should we try to develop our entire selves to deal with those situations? That's where we're going to get the virtues, okay? So I need to explain happiness and the virtues. Those are the two things that we're going to deal with Aristotelian virtue ethics. So the first component is happiness, or this is the Greek word, eudaimonia, okay? And eudaimonia is kind of a tough word to translate into English. Eu means good, and daimon is something like a spirit. So maybe a clunky translation would be something like having a well-ordered soul or a well-ordered spirit, a sort of holistic psychological sense of I've developed every aspect of myself to be good, right? But usually, that's a really long and clunky way of saying it, so we talk about happiness or we talk about flourishing. The advantage of translating it as happiness is we care about happiness, right? The pursuit of happiness, as is, in some of the American founding documents, right? Flourishing is also a good alternative because it emphasizes that it's an action. It's an ongoing thing. I am ongoingly trying to develop myself, right? Happiness or eudaimonia is not a short-term emotion. So when I say happiness, I don't mean your mood, I don't mean your emotion, I don't mean are you feeling good. I mean instead how you living, right? I don't know if you ever heard have any of your friends ask you that, how you living, right? Meaning, what are your long-term accomplishments like? Right? Whenever Aristotle says that we're calling people happy, we're not just asking about their mood or their emotions. We're asking, how have they developed themselves? Right? What is their life going like? Okay? That's the sense that eudaimonia that we're talking about. All right. The pithy saying is life according to reason and virtue. Okay, life according to reason, virtue. What is happiness? What is eudaimonia? It's life according to reason and virtue. Now I'm gonna have to explain what that means, but this is kind of what's going on. All right. And if you want to think about it in a different way, you can think about eudaimonia as being an entire life lived well. Okay? It's a life that's complete. It's basically missing nothing. Now, you could presumably add more money into someone's bank account, or you could give them a slightly bigger house, or maybe they could have a couple of more interesting acquaintances, right? There's small stuff that you can add, but whenever you look at that person's life, there's nothing really of substance that you could add that would change your answer to the question, is that person living a good life, right? Are they living a characteristically human life that is full and flourishing and full of all of the things that we want? Now, the way that you would actually investigate this, Aristotle is an empiricist when it comes to ethics. And what I mean by empiricism is it is informed by experience. It's not just thinking hard about what is necessary or just like reflecting really hard without reference to real life. Rather, it is going out into the world and seeing who are the people in your community who live the best lives. Right? And whenever you look at the people who have the best lives, what are the things that all of them have in common? Okay? You have to be able to see this in real life, or else this theory does not get off the ground. Okay? So this isn't a abstractly theoretical or a super, removed type of ethical theory. This is one that's on the ground. You have to identify the flourishing members of your community, and you have to try to identify in their lives what features are making them happy. Okay, so all that, again, is still very abstract. So what does this mean? Well, first of all, this is a holistic psychological type of idea. Okay, and what I mean by this is it isn't just focused on reasons. It isn't just focused on emotions. It isn't just focused on short-term things. It is long-term. It is about all of your faculties. It is about the situations that you interact with, okay? And Aristotle says some interesting things about the soul. So in Greek, the word for soul is psyche, and this is where we get the English word psychology or psyche, right? And he says, we share a lot of things in common with other animals, okay? Plants, they nourish themselves and grow, right? We have that in us. For happiness, we need to be able to, have enough food or shelter or clothing, those basic needs that allow us to nourish ourselves, to grow, and to even reproduce, right? Just like a plant would. Like animals also nourish themselves and grow, but they also move around in the world and they have desires. So my dog here, Lala, right? She likes to nap. She likes to play with her toys. So she has desires about things that she wants in life, things she likes, things she doesn't like. We also have that. We have to find a way to manage that. But what's unique to humans, at least if not in like at all, right? Definitely in complexity, is that we have reason, okay? We have reason, complex reason. We can think about things. I can ask myself what kind of life I want to lead. I can ask myself what kind of person do I want to be. I not only desire things, so this is using Harry Frankfurt, he's a contemporary philosopher, but I have second order desires. Namely, I want to be in certain ways, or I want to want certain things, right? So maybe I want donuts, but do I want to want donuts, right? If I'm trying to lose weight, those second order desires, the complexity, the ways in which we deal with things, often through language, often through complex social interactions, those are the things that really help us to try and understand human life, okay? And for eudaimonia to be achieved, we have to engage all of those capacities, all right? And this is basically what I mean here. Reason, this is still, without a doubt, intellectualistic or rationalistic in a lot of ways. Reason is the primary faculty. It is what is running the show, okay? But in contrast to other philosophers, You cannot ignore emotion and you cannot ignore motivations. You can't ignore other aspects of yourself. Knowing the right way to be or the right thing to do is not good enough. You also have to feel in the right ways. You have to be motivated to do the right thing across multiple situations and throughout time. All of that matters. Okay? The second component, and this is really, really important for Aristotle and Aristotelian ethics, is we have to manage external goods, okay? So far, I've talked about eudaimonia as psychological development. We train our reason to understand what a good life is or what kind of good character traits we want, right? We get our emotions and our motivations to be habituated in the right ways, okay? That's all stuff that I can control, at least, within a little bit of reason. But Aristotle's going to say that's not good enough. No matter how psychologically developed you are or how disciplined you are, there are still certain things that we need in order to live a good life, right? So things like health, wealth, beauty, friends, community, all these types of things, they're outside of our control. I can't do anything about my health. I mean, like, I can eat better, right? In case you can't tell, your boy thick, right? But I could exercise, right? But to a certain extent, I can't control like my genetics, okay? Aristotle's going to say, if you have a type of health profile that makes it such that you're always in pain, right? Or you're constantly having to go to the doctor, or just like costs a lot of money to maintain your health, that's going to make it way harder for you to live well. Right? If with wealth, if you don't have enough money to pay your bills and you're like paying electricity so that they won't shut it off because you know that the gas bill will give you 2 months and the electric company will only give you 1 month, right? That kind of stuff. That's going to be really stressful. Okay? Beauty. So this is kind of a funny one, but he's going to say, and you can look this up. CEOs of companies tend to be really tall. Okay? And it's not because tall people are any more intelligent, right? But it's because tall people are associated with more authoritativeness. Okay? And he's going to say, look, if you're really ugly, it's going to be tough for you to do a lot of things in life. It's going to be harder to make friends. It's going to be harder to potentially find romantic partners. People aren't going to take you as seriously, etc. Right? Friends. Again, you can't control that, right? I can't control whether people like me. Okay? But he would say that no one would choose a life full of all of the goods, right? So massive wealth, great reputation, great health, etc., if it meant that they didn't have a single good friend. Okay? That's how important he thinks friends are. Friends are one of those things that help us to become better people. They help us to share our lives with one another. And the Alexis Elder piece, which I'm not really going to go over tonight, is all about whether digital friendships, Facebook friends, or whatever else, whether those can be real friendships. Okay? Because for Aristotle, the shared life is super important. How are we reflecting on our values? Do we have people that call us out on our BS, right? Do we have people that are willing to struggle through life with us? The friends are super, super crucial. And if we don't have them, he's going to say we aren't living a good life. Eudaimonia is inherently social for Aristotle, okay? Now, there are alternative interpretations, but for the sake of our class, I think it's irreducibly social. And the last thing is what I've called community. You could call this politics. The Greek word polis means like a city-state. You could consider it maybe like the country or the state. But basically, we have to be living in a society that isn't just overtly oppressive. Okay, so right now there are a ton of race riots. I'm sure that you know Louisville has had there hasn't been, I don't think, a single day without protest in a really long time. Okay, what Aristotle would say is, look, if you are living in a political circumstance where you don't feel safe, where your government is actively oppressing you, that's going to mean that you can't live a happy life. Okay? So other ethical theories, Stoicism, for example, are going to say all you need to do is control your psychology. Okay? You can't control anything about life other than how you react to it. And if you do that, you are living as good as possible. That's what the Stoics say. Aristotle would say, listen, Stoics, I think that you're partially right. Okay? If you can't control your psychology, it's game over. It's game over. But happiness requires more than that. We need enough health not to be in debilitating pain. We need enough wealth not to be stressed about bills. We need enough beauty to be able to make friends. We need enough friends so that we aren't socially isolated. We need a non-oppressive political situation so that we aren't constantly in fear of our lives, and so that we have actual opportunities that we can engage in, that we can seriously engage with other people in our community and do what we want to do, right? Aristotle says that's just part of it. Okay? And this is part of the empirical method. Whenever you go out, if you look at the people and you ask yourself the question, would I want to live that person's life? If you gathered a big set of these kinds of people, you would find, I think, sufficient amounts of these types of external goods. And external because they're not up here. They're not in your mind. They're not completely up to you. Rather, they are outside of us and they are vulnerable to moral luck. Moral luck just means there are certain things outside of our control that nonetheless influence the quality of our ethical lives. Okay? So eudaimonia, broadly speaking, is happiness. Okay? Flourishing. How do you flourish? You need to have enough food and money and shelter to be able to nourish and grow. You need to be able to develop yourself and have a good education such that you have good desires and you get away from bad desires. You develop your emotions to feel good about good things and bad about bad things. You know what kind of person you should be. You know what you want out of life, and you start to train that in yourself to become a good person. That's what it is. It's that broad idea, long-term, how should I live my life? What would my life be like if it were complete and missing nothing really of consequence? That's what eudaimonia is, and that is sort of the aspiration. That's what we want to strive for. So I call it a mix of self-development, but also luck. And Aristotle's just going to say, that's what human life is. It'd be nice, maybe, if we were the type of animal or, organism that didn't need all of these external things, but we do. And we all want to be happy. So not only develop yourself, you should do that no matter what, but we also need things to break our way from time to time. Side note, this is also what motivates us to be politically active, right? If you think that happiness is dependent upon social institutions, then you are going to be motivated to try and change institutions for the better. So we've set out what we think a good life is. We have thought about what it means to live well. Think about that. You've already listened to the David Foster Wallace speech, This is Water. It's the same sort of concern. What kind of life do we want to lead? How do we achieve that? How do we achieve that? And Aristotle's answer is the virtues. So the Greek word is arete, and this is usually translated as virtue, which is kind of old-timey. No one really talks about this. Virtue is just a good way of being, or excellence. And excellence captures that. It's a good way of being, right? So, for example, he talks about maybe like a guitar player, or he talks about the cithara. But you could imagine an instrumentalist, right? A saxophonist. In order for them to become a good saxophonist, they have to practice and develop good habits such that they learn to play the saxophone really, really well. Same sort of thing happens in our moral lives. In order for us to live good lives, we have to practice at living a good life. And just like a good saxophonist is not a good saxophonist because they play one note well one time, right? They need to habituate it in themselves. They need to be able to play that note consistently across time. It needs to become second nature. That's what the virtues kind of are. Now, not second nature in the sense that you just forget about it, but you habituate yourself, and it becomes easier and easier to be the right way. Okay? So it's a disposition to be the right way and to do the right things. So for the Aristotelian virtue ethicist, you almost never will get, at least in simple terms, what is the right thing that this person should do? Rather, what you're going to ask as an Aristotelian virtue ethicist is, what kind of life does this person want to lead, and what kind of character do they want to develop? And given that they want to live a certain type of life and they want to develop a certain type of character, does it make sense for them to do this thing? Okay? So you're always couching ethical questions within these broad, holistic concerns. So it's thinking, it's feeling, and it's doing things all in the right way. So I'll give you a really quick example. Giving to charity. Okay? If someone gives money to charity, something like the Against Malaria Foundation, they're literally saving lives by giving malaria nets to people in countries where they can't afford it and where they might, with pretty good probability become very sick or die from something like malaria. So anyone who gives money to a charity like that, the Against Malaria Foundation, is doing a good thing. Is it virtuous, however? And Aristotle's going to say, I don't know. It depends. How did that person arrive at that conclusion? How did they feel about giving that money to charity? What was the tact or the way in which they did it? So if they are giving money to charity only because they want a tax break, or only because they want to improve their reputation because they sullied it doing something stupid, that is not virtuous. Their thoughts aren't in the right direction. If they feel above the people that they're helping, such that it's like, of course I'm going to help these idiots, right? If they feel conflicted, like, I don't know if I should help them, maybe they should just help themselves, that is not virtuous. The virtuous person feels good about doing good things. Alternatively, they also feel bad about doing bad things. So for example, if you mess up with one of your friends, you go and make amends, you apologize, and you find a way not to do that thing again. So the feelings matter. And then manner of execution. So the Against Malaria Foundation, you usually just give a donation online, right? But if there was some sort of online or in-person interaction, there's a huge difference between maybe writing a check or handing someone some cash, looking them in the eye and saying, thank you, I really hope this helps, and throwing the money at someone and saying, well, at least you got your money, right? The manner of execution matters. So the Aristotelian virtue ethicist, it's not only broad and holistic, but a lot of different components matter. It's not just about what you do, but it's about why you do what you do, how you feel whenever you do it, and the manner in which you actually do that thing. Tact matters, okay? So if you're an asshole, that matters because that is not fully virtuous, right? The major way that virtues are often thought of, and there are a lot of very classical virtues such as justice, moderation, courage, friendliness, wisdom, these types of things. The way that you identify the virtues is twofold. First, you find some sort of universal situation in life that we all face. Okay? Why does that matter? Because just in the same way that we all want to be happy, we all face certain things just living human life, right? Because we always face those things, we will not help but develop habits in relation to them. So try to find those universal situations that all humans face. And then second, try to find the right way to regulate that emotion or that sphere of life. So because we talked about generosity, this is a virtue. You can think about the situation is at some point in our lives, we will have more than we actually need. The virtue with respect to that is avoiding the extremes. Someone who never gives up from their excess, from what they don't need, is really stingy or miserly, right? They keep everything to themselves. That is not a good way of being. People aren't going to like you. It's not cooperative. There's a lot of good reasons for not being that way. But on the other hand, if you're constantly giving to people such that you don't care about your own financial situation and like you put yourself into financial trouble and you don't save up for emergencies or whatever else, you're open-handed too much, right? That also is not a good way of being, because there might come a time whenever you aren't going to have what you need, right? And no one else maybe is going to be able to help you. So generosity is somewhere in the middle. You're not completely stingy with your money, right? You're not keeping it all to yourself, but you're not also just giving it away all the time. You're kind of balancing those two impulses and ending up somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to illustrate this again with a very classical virtue that a lot of people think about. And so rather than a situation, this is about an emotion. So the situation that all humans face, or at least most, is fear. Okay? If we cannot face fear in life, we can't flourish. Think about all of the times we're afraid. Learning a new skill, asking someone out on a date, going into a job interview or asking for a promotion, doing a project that could further your career or do something really important in your life, facing a really tough medical diagnosis. There's a lot of ways in which we face fear in life. We need to find a way to face it the best. So how do we figure that out? Mean between the extremes. Not too much fear, not like lacking all fear altogether. So the traits here, you could think of the coward as someone who suffers from being afraid all the time. Why would it be bad to be the coward? Like I said, you're not going to be able to do any of those things that elicit fear. You're not going to ask that person out. You're not going to go for that job. You're not going to find a new hobby, whatever else it is. You just aren't going to be able to live well. But on the other hand, you're also not the rash person. The person who says, hold my beer, and then like jumps off of a 2-story building into a pool and hopes they make it, right? If you have no regard for fear at all, you're going to do a lot of stupid things, and potentially one of those things is going to catch up with you someday. Courage, instead, is somewhere in the middle. It's someone who understands what fear is, and they feel it, right? It's completely human to feel something like the emotion of fear. But you understand that. You try and figure out what is it trying to teach me about this, okay? And you need to figure out whether you should listen to it or not. Sometimes battles are not worth fighting, okay? And you just have to retreat. That's fine. That's not being a coward. That's you being afraid potentially, but looking at all of the calculations and deciding whether you should do that thing. Other times it's going to be, no, we need to win this battle, and so I'm going to go into it, right? So the virtues, again, are these long-term patterns that we develop in ourselves. With respect to situations or emotions that we all face, we try to understand what is the good life, and how should I develop myself in order to face this emotion or this situation continually? And so I do the right thing, and I do the right thing, and I do the right thing, and I keep on doing it until I develop in myself a disposition or a habit, this second nature, to do the right thing over time. So just like a musician again, they can play the scales or the notes without thinking. They think, right? But it's easy. That's what it's like whenever you're becoming a good person. Now, this is also a developmental story. No one is fully good right at the outset. You constantly have to train yourself, okay? And Aristotle's okay with that. None of us are fully virtuous at the very outset. We just keep on trying to become better. So if I am the miser, if I'm the really stingy person and I'm giving money to charity, but I feel terrible about it, then I still give the money to charity. I still need to do the right thing. But I start to try and say, okay, so what are my reasons? Okay, I correct my reasons. All right, now I start to try to change my emotions. I start to try to make positive associations with the charity. And then I make sure that I never miss a donation whenever I can give it. And slowly over time, through those little incremental developmental things, I've become a better person and developed in myself the virtue of generosity. So that's Aristotelian virtue ethics in a nutshell. 2 questions. What is a good life? What should I develop my character like in order to achieve that life? That's Aristotelian virtue ethics. So as I said, I'm going to develop complications in this by addressing the secondary literature, okay? And one of the articles that we read was by John Doris, and it's about situationism in psychology and trying to make it relevant to Aristotelian virtue ethics. And so what he's basically going to say is, look, it would be nice if Aristotelian virtue ethics, was absolutely tenable and it was right. But actually, whenever you study experimental and social psychology of basically the past century, what you find is a lot of evidence that shows that people actually don't have anything like these global or stable character traits like Aristotle says that we do. So, for example, you can, and feel free to look this up, there's a really famous set of experiments done by Stanley Milgram, psychologist who did some experiments at Yale. And basically, it was set up such that so say that I am the person who's being experimented on, and say that Doris is the scientist that's asking me to do something. And let's say that my dog is the other co-conspirator. Okay, so in this experiment, Doris would come into the room, and I'm the only one not in on this, right? And he says, okay, so we've trained this other person, my dog, to do a series of memory tasks. And whenever you say a word, they will say another word in response. If they get it right, then you go on to the next question. If they get it wrong, then administer an electric shock. On this machine, there are any number of things, but like let's say 24 switches that start from like a really tiny electrical shock all the way up to 450 volts that's marked with a XXX or lethal. So like on the button, it says it's going to kill the person, right? So they set up this experiment because they wanted to see how many people would do something bad, namely kill another person potentially, just because a scientist or someone in authority told them to do that. Now, the scientist does not coerce the person. They don't touch them, right? They don't withhold their family. The scientist doesn't have any power over them, okay? And Milgram and his colleagues initially thought that this number, like the percentage of people that were going to do this thing and kill someone just because they were told to do it, was going to be really low, right? Instead, what they found in certain situations where, say, the scientist is wearing a white lab coat and they're carrying a clipboard and they're speaking authoritatively, they got up to 60% or more in some iterations of people to go all the way to the lethal 450 volts. That seems really strange. A second thing, and he talks more about this in his paper, are the Levin and Eisen phone booth experiments. So there's a phone booth, right? You used to be able to go into these glass closets and make phones. Not everyone had cell phones. And whenever you put your coins in, you would get extra change out in the bottom, right? Now, in one iteration, so there were 2 types of groups that they were testing here. In both types, the person went in and made a phone call, and then as they were coming out of the phone booth, someone walked by and pretend to trip and fall or just drop a pile of papers. And the experiment was to see whether the person coming out of the phone booth would help them with them having dropped the papers, right? The test was, what is the difference between people who were in the phone booth and they left an extra dime in the change return, so they got a little bit of extra change, versus not doing anything like that and they get like the correct amount of change? Would that have any influence on whether they help out? And what they found was that the people, at least in one iteration of the experiment, who found the dime, were 87.5% of them helped. Whereas the people who did not have a dime, only 4% of them helped. Again, this doesn't really make sense, at least according to Doris and other people, or on its face. if people are really good, then they should be good no matter what these situations are telling them to do, right? They should basically be comfortable with saying to authority, I don't care who you are, I'm not going to do this unjust thing. Or it doesn't matter that I found extra change or not, I'm going to help this person who dropped their papers in front of me, right? And so the question is, how do we face, it's not just, a couple of experiments. There's a fair number of experiments that show that people aren't as good as we think that they are. What does that mean? What does that mean? All right. What he points out is that Aristotelian virtue ethics, I've abbreviated as AVE, assumes that we have global character traits. Meaning, these traits are cross-situationally stable. If we are generous, we're going to be generous whenever a homeless person asks us for money, whenever there's some sort of, charity drive at work, whenever there's just any opportunity to be generous, we are going to do that. We're going to be internally consistent. We're not going to be generous sometimes and not generous in other times, right? As soon as we've fully developed the character trait of generosity, we are always generous. That's the point. It's not in the beginning when we're training it up, but whenever we've developed it. And moreover, at least in Aristotelian virtue ethics, the more often that we develop a good character trait, the more likely it is that we develop also other good character traits. Okay? So if I'm a courageous person and I can face fear, that's going to make it more likely for me to be moderate. So I can, control pleasures and pains. It's going to make me more likely to be just. It's going to make me more likely to be friendly. The traits seem to kind of work together. All right? That's what Aristotelian virtue ethics is saying. But John Doris basically says there's no evidence for this. There's no evidence for this. If we're comparing this against situationism or local character traits, which I'm going to get to, then the evidence goes in favor of the other theory, not the Aristotelian, right? Local character traits, not global ones like the Aristotelians. Local ones explain what's going on more easily. And that's because local character traits are stable only in situations. So will people reliably do things? Yes, but only in relation to a specific situation. So will I reliably give money whenever the person in the checkout line asks me if I'd like to give money to, the children's hospital and there's a line of people behind me, right? Am I the kind of person who will reliably give money there? Maybe, right? So let's just say yes. But that doesn't at all entail that I am the kind of person who's going to give money to charity whenever no one is looking. Local character traits say that there are stable, predictable ways of acting, but it's only in relation to a certain situation. People, moreover, can be inconsistent. So this is the subject of really great fiction. Maybe consider something like Breaking Bad. Can you be the kind of person who is really ruthless, or The Sopranos, ruthless with other people who are committing crime or people who do you wrong, but then go home and be incredibly gentle with your children or your spouse or whoever else, right? The Aristotelian virtue ethics is going to say that's going to be really tough. And that's because once you've really fully developed something like being a considerate type of person, you aren't going to be able to turn that off. The local character traits model is going to say, no, it makes perfect sense, right? Character traits, predictability, you can still make effective predictions, but it's nested in the perspective of a given situation, not a grand global thing. And character can be fragmented on the local character traits model. Okay? Meaning, I could be a really courageous person, but also very ungenerous, and there's no real contradiction in that. There's no even probabilistic, necessarily, connection between being a good person in one way and a good person in other ways. All right. So this is basically what he's going to say. He's going to say, all right, Aristotle, I'm going to take your theory very seriously. And I'm going to think about, what it means to be a good life. And I completely buy that your theory says that people should be able to habituate themselves to live a good life. And once they've fully developed a character trait of, say, courage, then they're going to be courageous no matter what situation they face, with a partner, with a business, in their personal lives, whatever else it is, they're going to be able to face that thing well. right? That's what you're saying. But whenever I go out and I do my own investigations, and not just anecdotal, picking from here and there, but like trying to rigorously control human behavior as much as possible, I find that there's actually a ton of evidence that says those global character traits don't exist, and rather only local character traits do. Situationism, the situation is controlling human behavior, not us and what we're doing. That's the most pointed way of putting what John Doris is basically saying. Rather than thinking that I myself am in control of my actions, at least like as far as predictability, more often than not, it's a situation. If I put someone in a bad situation, reliably, I'm going to get them to do bad things. If I put someone in a good situation, reliably, I'm going to get them to do good things. It is not about internal character, it is about the situation. So that's what the situationist is focused on. They're focused on the small sort of situations, and that's how they deal with things. Now, what I like about John Doris in this particular paper, not only is it just a really clever and important objection to Aristotelian virtue ethics, but he also gives some positive advice. So if situationism is not just a descriptive thesis, descriptive claims are about the way the world is, as opposed to normative claims, which are about the way the world should be. Descriptive claims are about the facts, and normative claims are about the values, right? He says, I think situationism isn't just descriptive. It is descriptive. I think that it explains why people do what they do. But I think it's also normative in the sense that it can help us to decide how to live better lives or to do good things. How? Well, what you do whenever you realize that people are doing things not based on their internal character, but based on the situation, what you do is you realize that the world is a morally dangerous place. And whenever you realize that, what that means is don't put yourself in a bad situation. If you put yourself in a bad situation, that increases the probability really, really high that you're going to do something bad. Or if you want to do something good, put yourself in a good situation, right? Hang around people who are successful. Hang around people who are doing the things that you want to do, being the ways that you want to be. And the second thing is, given that, whenever you look at this data and you see how often people don't do the right thing, what you realize is people, us, we are prone to moral failure often, right? What does that mean? He says, consider this situation, and I'm adding in details and changing it up a little bit. Let's say that you're in a long-term relationship, and let's say that you are monogamous. Okay, so you only want to be with your partner. And you are married to your spouse, and they're out of town on a business trip, right? And someone in your office has a crush on you, okay? And they want to get at you. And so what they do is they sort of they invite you out to drinks, okay? And they say, but don't worry, the whole office is going. And so you're like, okay, cool. I'll go out to some drinks with some friends. Maybe it's been a long week and you have a group of colleagues who are going to go out and you're going to blow off some steam. But then as it rolls around to 5 o'clock, maybe 4:45, they text you and they say, hey, everybody else bailed. So maybe we don't meet up at, the pub. Let's go meet up at this place. And maybe the ambiance is a lot more intimate, right? And someone like Doris or the situationist is going to say, okay, don't overestimate your strength. And don't underestimate the power of the situation. If you want to be faithful to your spouse, you are not going to put yourself into a bad situation because it's not about you, right? It's about the situation. And if you've had a stressful week, and if you're with this other person and this person is coming on strong, and let's say that you even think that they're attractive, right? And now you get a little food in you, you get some drinks in you, right? It's pretty easy to see that someone is likely to be unfaithful if they overestimate their character and they underestimate the power of the situation. That's what John Doris is trying to say. That's what he's trying to say. Rather than constantly trying to focus on your character and overestimating your strengths, consider the power of the situation and consider the ways in which you're likely to fail. That's how you control your behavior, not the way the Aristotelians are telling. Now, there's a lot of literature over this. John Doris basically made a career talking about these things. Aristotelians have argued that, these things are compatible, so you can try to get these two things together. But just to draw the contrast, Aristotelian character traits are global. Once you've developed them fully, you should be able to be virtuous no matter what situation arises. And whenever you fully become a good person in one way, it's more likely that you're a good person in other ways. Situationism, or local character traits, not global, local, they're basically going to say you act consistently, but not according to big situations, according to small situations. And the situation likely is to predict your behavior more than your individual character. So that's one potential critique. The last one that I'm going to consider is the work of Lisa Tessman. And in particular, she's going to say, what I want to look at is people who are not optimists. Consider yourself in a political situation where things are really tough and there's a lot of oppression and things are bad. And if you are a good person, you're probably not going to be able to live in the best way. All right? She says, look, philosophy, history, all those types of things, they've focused on the optimist. And what she means is they've focused on people like Martin Luther King Jr. or whoever else who expect some sort of success, okay? They think that they're going to be able to achieve things someday. They have some sort of hope, be it in God, be it in destiny, be it whatever else. But they believe that they'll be able to accomplish what they set out to accomplish. Maybe not in their lifetimes, but maybe in the future, and they find it instrumental for them to be good in those particular circumstances. So here we're talking about moral luck, right? We can't control the political circumstances. And here we're also talking about the question, do virtues benefit their possessors? Okay? The traditional interpretation with Aristotle is that virtues make you better off. If you are a courageous person, you are going to be better off for it. If you are a generous person, you are going to be better off for it. Tessman is saying, let's look at situations where it seems like being the good person or doing the right thing is going to make you worse off, potentially. How do we deal with that? And she says, I'm going to focus on the pessimist. Okay? The pessimist. And the pessimist is the person who doesn't expect success. They think that success is incredibly, incredibly unlikely, and they do not hold out hope. But they still keep struggling. They still keep struggling. Why would someone like this keep struggling? What do we do with that? What do we do with these types of people? They know that if they do what they need to do, it's going to impact their life, and they even know that it's really unlikely that, they're going to be able to accomplish their goals. Okay? Sometimes doing the right thing and being the right way leads to moral damage. It messes us up. Or heavy knowledge, the knowledge that we can't actually accomplish what we would like to accomplish. If we want to end all racial oppression in the United States, it is not going to happen in 1 or 2 actions or a month or even a year. It is a lifelong process that a lot of us have to struggle through. Now, the optimist is going to say, we need to do that. I think that America can reach that goal, right? I have some sort of hope. The pessimist is going to say, no, I don't really have any expectation for this, but they keep struggling. What do we do with this? And if it's the case that struggling for something like racial equality, if you live in a community where, maybe you'll get beat up for this. So, I come from a conservative part of Texas. When I was in high school or thereabouts, a kid who was gay got killed for being gay in a nearby city, right? There are certain times whenever being a certain way is going to lead to downsides. What do we do with this, right? What do we do with this? Does this place pressure on us not to be who we are, not to do what we think is right? Okay? Think about World War II Germany, but also think about contemporary America, right? Think about, the people who say that they're just following orders. Or people who say, if I did the right thing, I would lose my job. Or if I stood up to my boss, maybe harm would befall my friends or my acquaintances, right? What do we do in situations like that? Now, she's going to say that there's a few different potential options. The first one is what she calls sour grapes or adaptive preferences. Okay? This is roughly what the Stoics say, all right? So whenever we're facing bad circumstances and we can't change everything, and we don't really have any hope for being completely successful, one thing that we can do is just say, well, you know what? I can't control what my community is doing. I can't control what other people are doing, but I can control myself and I can control my reactions. Okay? I'm going to learn to try to live a happy life and a good life in the face of insurmountable odds. Okay? So I don't let my happiness rely on justice. It's all about me. Okay? Adaptive preferences. If I can't get what I want, then rather than keeping to strive for that thing and being frustrated because I can't get it, I change what I want. She calls this the sour grapes. Another alternative, nihilism. So she means no hope, no happiness, no virtues, no values. Okay? So this is sort of the screw it, right? Screw it. None of this matters. I hate it. And maybe I don't hate it. It doesn't matter. I don't care, right? I don't have any values. I'm just going to keep on going. So maybe you could think about a really bad reading of Friedrich Nietzsche, or maybe you let something like aesthetic value affect your life. So rather than striving for the moral thing or the immoral thing, I'm going to strive for the beautiful thing, or I'm going to strive for the thing that's the most pleasing. But basically, I just don't worry about these ethical or political values anymore. I don't deal with that. She doesn't like either of those two things, okay? And rather, what she's going to say is there are virtues that we can develop, and we can have this type of pessimistic resistance, okay? So what are the potential virtues of the pessimist? If I am facing really terrible odds, something really tough in life, then why would I keep trying to do the right thing, even in a situation where I don't think that I can accomplish it? Well, she's going to say first, self-respect. You can develop the virtue of self-respect, meaning you regard yourself as important. You don't care necessarily about the success. You don't care about other people necessarily. What you care about is yourself and how you view yourself. Okay? And that is important to you. And this is related to integrity. Integrity is sticking to your values. Maybe it doesn't matter to other people. Maybe it won't lead to the most material success. Maybe it'll even lead to some sort of danger to yourself. But you care about your values and you care about sticking to your guns, and that's what you're going to do. Why are you going to do it? You're going to do it because you're a good person. That's why you're going to do it. You don't care that most of the stuff is bullshit. You care that you're a good person and the good person would do the right thing. That's what you're going to do. Whether or not it's the most practical thing to do, you're still going to do it no matter what. She's going to say you can develop something like a sense of freedom, meaning you refuse to let the circumstances define you. All right? So sometimes you look at the situation and you realize that it's hopeless. Okay? Now, I'm not saying to charge into every single battle, right? The Aristotelian would say, look, assess. Decide whether you should fight this one. But she's basically saying you don't need to develop the type of trait that says that you just do whatever allows you to survive. Now, I don't think she's going to fault anyone for just surviving, right? But what she's saying is whenever we act counter to the circumstances or counter to the situation, whenever we do things that we know, probabilistically speaking, will lead to bad things for us, we'll lose a job, we'll lose a friend, whatever else. She's going to say, we affirm our freedom. We do not let the situation dictate things, we dictate things. That's what it means to be free. It means not being controlled by external things, not being controlled by your passions or whatever else. It means being controlled by yourself and the values that you set for yourself. And no matter how hopeless things are, you can always exercise this type of freedom. And then the last thing she calls staking a claim. And this is basically saying that we are worth certain things. Okay, so I imagine something like the people in the civil rights era who decided to, desegregate things, to sit down in areas that were whites only, those types of actions that lead potentially to them being beaten or killed or any number of things. What is one potential value that anyone could get from something like that? You might not get served, or you might not be respected in your community in a certain way if you do those things. But you can stake a claim in the sense that you say, look, I am worth this particular treatment, and I refuse to be treated in any other way. Okay? So staking a claim is basically saying, I will not back down because I'm not going to let you treat me second class or in any way that I don't think that I deserve. Even if I can't get you to respect me in the way that I want, I will not let you disrespect me without any resistance. Because I am worth it and I'm going to stake that claim. So the reason that I bring up Tessman is, remember whenever I was talking about eudaimonia, there's all of the external stuff. Health, wealth, beauty, friends, injustice, all of that stuff that impacts happiness. Impacts whether we can flourish. Okay? Are we okay with that? Are we okay with that? Tessman is going to say, yeah, we can develop other virtues, right? We can sort of adapt maybe a type of virtue ethics to deal with these types of things. Okay? Now, I'm not entirely sure whether I can completely make sense of her system. I should probably talk with her about this because she's still living and still writing, and she just wrote a book on similar things that I haven't read yet. But this is what we have to ask about with Aristotelian virtue ethics, in the sense that if happiness depends on external things that are outside of our control, are we comfortable with saying someone is not happy, they are not living a good life if they are in an unjust society, if they have, really tough health problems, such they're constantly in pain, if they do not have money? Are we okay with that? And if we aren't, does that mean we get rid of virtue ethics altogether? We get rid of the notion of a good life? Or does that mean we start to change the system to say, well, Aristotle got it right that we should focus on what a good life is and how we change our characters, but he got it wrong what a good life is and what the character traits are. Okay? So, should you buy Aristotle? Should you buy this Aristotelian virtue ethics program? Well, it has a few features. One is it's focused on really broad questions. The next couple theories that we're going to get, especially utilitarianism and Kantian deontology, they're going to focus on actions. This is focused on ways of being and ways of living a good life. Broad, holistic questions, not just what you should do or a formula, but how you should be, what your emotions should be like, what the tactful way of doing things are. This theory is complex and it's also vulnerable. Aristotelian virtue ethics is very much okay with the gray area, and it's very much okay with saying, look, I don't know. Okay? There's a related component here called particularism, meaning Aristotelian virtue ethicists are not universalists. They're not going to give really broad, abstract ethical principles like always respect people. Those might be kind of helpful from time to time, but what does it mean to respect? And who are you? What circumstances are you in? How are you going to show respect? All of those specific questions for the Aristotelian have to be answered, because you cannot divorce a person and what they should do from who they are, what their goals are, and what situation in life they're in. Look at me, right? I'm a pale-skinned, burly-looking dude. I can do things and interact with the world in certain ways that some of my other friends can't. One of my best friends is a petite, dark-skinned woman, right? The ways that we get treated in certain areas are very different. Okay, and the Aristotelian is going to say, for that reason, morality is really complex, and I can't divorce what people should do and how they should be from what situation they're in, right? It's complex. It's also vulnerable. It's vulnerable. Happiness is not something for Aristotle. Happiness isn't something that everyone can achieve, no problem. It takes a lifetime of development, and it can be ruined at the very end. And this is what he talks about with the example of Priam. So Priam is the king of Troy, right? If you've read Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey, or if you've seen, the Brad Pitt movie or whatever else. So Priam is the king of Troy. His idiot son goes and kidnaps a beautiful woman, right? Helen of Troy. It brings the most brutal warriors and kings to Troy, and they start a war. So Priam had an incredible kingdom. He had a really great son, Hector. And by the end of that war, he saw his good son Hector get killed by Achilles. He saw the Greeks break into his city, steal everything, kill people, rape people, all sorts of stuff. And that's how he ended his life. Even if everything had gone well up to that point, it crumbled at the very end. And Aristotle would say, for that reason, we would not call Priam happy. We don't think that's a good life if everything crumbles at the very end. Okay? So this is a lifelong thing. Priam didn't do anything wrong necessarily. I mean, it depends on the tradition that we're talking about, right? But he didn't, make Achilles drag his son's body behind a chariot. He didn't make the Greeks break in and steal and murder and rape, right? He didn't ask to be murdered. But we still would look at Priam's life and we'd say, yeah, if I could choose other lives, or if I could choose among, a variety of lives, I probably wouldn't choose that one. That's a really tough ending. Okay? So happiness is vulnerable because there are things outside of our control that affect whether or not we can accomplish this thing. Now, the Aristotelians can say, yeah, that's just how it is. And you should strive for that no matter what. I'm sorry if you face bad luck. Okay? And it's based on experience. So this is potentially a good thing because you have to go out and you have to see who are the people in your community who are flourishing and what traits are they developing, right? What are the bugs? What are reasons why you might not want to be an Aristotelian? Some people say that Aristotelian virtue ethics is basically, it's unattainable, right? Because it sets the bar really, really high. It's not just about doing the right thing, right? It's about doing it for the right reasons, with the right motivations, the right feelings, and doing it in the right way. And it's not just about you controlling what you can do, but you as well as possible managing all of those external goods: health, wealth, beauty, friends, your political situation, right? That makes it really, 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 really tough. Do we think that it's acceptable that a moral theory says that most of us probably aren't going to be happy, either because we're not disciplined enough to develop ourselves into good people, or we don't have a good enough luck to face the right kind of situations with respect to external goods to become good people, right? So this is also called the elitist objection. There are a few objections to Aristotle with respect to ableism, because he's going to say, if you're in debilitating pain or you don't even have the intellectual capacities to develop certain types of virtues, you can't flourish. Do we like that? Maybe we do, maybe we don't, right? Maybe there's a way of softening it. Maybe there's a way of revising Aristotle. I don't know, but I wanted to say this. And the last thing is casuistic. So certain moral philosophers are going to say, whenever we are talking about morality and ethics, what we're trying to do is to find principles. We want general rules that tell us what is good all of the time. Aristotle, like I said, isn't in the business of doing that. Okay? Casuistry is saying you take things case by case. Certain people think that that's really sleazy because that's how we make exceptions for ourselves. Other people are okay with that. All right? So that's it. That's Aristotelian virtue ethics. Just to reiterate, it is about us trying to be happy. He says we all want to be happy, but we disagree on what happiness is. What is it for Aristotle? It's a life according to reason and virtue. You have the things that you need to nourish yourself and to grow. You have the things that you need to satisfy your desires and create good desires and to move around in the world. You have reason in order to allow you to reflect on things. You have friends who help you to accomplish complex things in life. You live in a community, ideally, that isn't oppressing you and that also has opportunities like education and employment, right? Things that allow you to flourish. All of that is involved in happiness. It's not just self-development. You have to develop yourself, but it's also luck. It's also a certain amount of external goods. Given that we want to live that good life, how do we do that? We do that by training our character. We find the universal emotions or situations in life: fear, having more than we need, right? Pleasure. And then we try to figure out what is the right way to be, to develop ourselves with respect to those things. Not too much, not too little, usually somewhere in the middle. Now, that's just a general pattern. It doesn't have to have that, right? But Aristotle is giving us just a general pattern to try and get the ball rolling to help us to understand how things are going, right? So, what is a good life? How do I develop myself to achieve it? No matter what, we all are pursuing a certain vision of happiness. He thinks that's why we should make sure that we have the right one. And no matter what, we're going to develop certain habits, certain ways of being. That's why we should try to develop the good ones. That's Aristotelian virtue ethics. We had the challenges from Doris and from Tessman. But I hope that I've helped to make this theory make a little bit more sense, and we'll get a few more as the semester goes on. Thank you so much for your attention. I will see y'all next time.